I was an FBI special agent for 26 years, serving the FBI in Chicago, Honolulu, and then Jacksonville, Florida. 9/11 changed everything.
Was it all hands on deck? I mean, that's what I've heard from other people that were in intelligence spaces and things like that.
In the immediate aftermath, like the day of, they set up a command post and you begin running down the leads. It was a scary time, Kevin, because nobody knew what was going to happen next. Right?
Yeah.
And so we thought maybe this was the front end of just a series of attacks that was going to last for months. The one thing that still keeps the FBI agents awake at night is the idea of a lone wolf attacker. As soon as you get several people who are kind of chit-chatting and kind of making plans, you hope that the human intelligence, the informants we have out in the community, might produce enough intelligence where we could prevent those attacks.
Tom Simon, thank you so much for being on Thinking Bigger with Kevin Feely.
Thanks so much for having me on, Kevin.
Yeah, you flew out here. I flew to Atlanta. We met halfway pretty much.
It's an honor. Yeah, this is great to get to see Atlanta.
Yeah, absolutely. So Tom, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about your background and what you did for work and what you're doing now?
Sure. I was an FBI special agent for 26 years, serving the FBI in Chicago, Honolulu, and then Jacksonville, Florida.
Honolulu.
I got, we can talk about that later. I got old and retired in 2021 and opened up my own private investigative firm called Simon Investigations, licensed in Florida and several other states. And most of my clients right now, I'm doing financial crime investigations for clients, which is pretty much what I did for the FBI as well.
Yeah. And what led you, I mean, was it you wanted to make more money or you were just done with the
I got old, man. I did it for 26 years. So with the FBI, what happens is once you have 20 years in and you hit age 50, you're eligible to retire. But then they march you out the door when you hit age 57. And so every agent out there has to make a decision during that 7-year window of time about what's the right time for them. And I wanted to be a private investigator and help clients in utilizing the skills I learned as an FBI agent. And I thought I'm going to be way more marketable and just have kind of more energy to punch my own ticket at age 51, which is what I was when I retired,
right?
Versus waiting till I'm a broken down 57-year-old guy.
Well, you look great for post 51. So yeah,
I appreciate it. You look great too, Kevin.
Well, I'm only 31. So, so what was it like? So you went to school for accounting, right? You went to Clemson.
Exactly. And I would say that I went to school for accounting, not because I had some like passion for debits and credits, but because when I was in high school, I met an FBI agent and asked him and I wanted to be an FBI agent. I wanted to do that since I was a very young kid. Mm-hmm. And I asked him, what should I major in school? And he said, well, at the time, and still to an extent now, the best majors are law or accounting. And I hated school. And so I said, what's entailed with that? And he said, well, accounting's a 4-year degree. Law, you got to get a 4-year degree and then go to law school for 3 extra years. I was like, well, I'm smart enough to know that 4 is less than 7. So I majored in accounting.
Yeah, when I look at some of the most successful entrepreneurs, like people that don't work for somebody else but have built really successful businesses, attorneys, people who are licensed attorneys that don't really practice, and CPAs, people with a CPA background.
Yeah.
I think you really learn about the structure a lot, but what do you think it is that, like, why are those types more successful than people that maybe went to school for something else?
Well, I think learning how money flows in and out of an organization makes a lot of sense, and kind of recalibrating your mind to stop thinking in terms of the cash flow and start thinking in terms of how you are earning that money over time is sort of a basic tenet of being a CPA. And when you're actually working as a CPA, which I did for 3 years, you're functioning as a consultant, right? You're going into many different businesses as an auditor, which is what I was with a firm called KPMG, and you're seeing how those businesses operate, and you're seeing the money just falling out the door because they can't control expenses, or the fact that they're not collecting on their accounts receivable. And so it's like a boot camp business school where you're working really hard, but you're seeing these businesses from the inside on what succeeds and what fails. So
right.
It kind of makes sense that you're seeing people who have that background be successful running their own businesses as well.
Got it. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's, a business is all about money flowing in and out. So if that's not,
And the FBI sees it the same way, right? That's why they hire guys like me, one, to do the financial crimes, but two, the money flowing in and out of, IBM or Microsoft it flows in and out in the same ways that it flows out of a drug cartel or the mafia or a terrorist organization. And so having CPAs who could follow the money and understand that flow of money just makes a lot of sense for the Bureau.
Yeah, and sometimes those guys have accountants too. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, well, everybody needs to figure out how much they're making, right?
Yeah. So what was your childhood like? You said you kind of from high school on wanted to be an FBI agent, but was this like a lifelong thing? And how did you grow up?
I grew up in suburban Chicago, and I was a kind of a bookish kid, liked comic books and action novels and stuff like that. I wasn't a remarkable athlete or anything like that. Went to Catholic school, and I think the fiction more than anything else, the movies I watched, the comic books I read, and the books I enjoyed, it formed the idea that I want to have a life that one is kind of meaningful and two is filled with action.
Right.
And so the FBI just kind of made sense to me. Now I thought I would be doing a lot more, jumping off moving trains than the career actually turned out to be. But the career was incredibly rewarding in different ways.
What were some of the things that you really loved about it? And did it end up being action packed? I mean, was there a lot of action or?
Um, Again, my world was financial crimes, right? So it's not. I've arrested hundreds of people, been on hundreds of search warrants, done lots of surveillances, but the amount of like fighting and shooting that you actually do, any
Yeah.
FBI agent, no matter what squad you're on,
Yeah.
is remarkably small compared to what Hollywood would lead you to believe.
Right. Of course. I
But the
mean,
amount of brain power you're using to actually solve these crimes, gather the evidence, and kind of build that case from the ground up, there's something that was just quite addictive to me as far as doing that to kind of create that narrative of the case.
got it. Yeah. So I mean, there's a physical aspect to it, but there's a lot of mental chess going on, right?
And the mental chess was really where it was at for me, right? I wasn't a SWAT team guy. I'm not a great marksman or anything like that.
Yeah.
So I always kind of gravitated more to the interview and interrogation stuff, which
Got
is
it.
more interesting to me, the behavioral science aspect of the job.
Yeah. I think that stuff is very interesting too. Now, I mean, I know that you said you're not a marksman, but did you like the tactical stuff of it?
I liked it because it was foreign to me, right? A lot of the agents were coming out of the military or coming out of police forces. I was coming out of a CPA firm, so I knew none of that. I never
Right.
handcuffed anybody.
Yeah.
I'd been in very few fights or anything like that. And so the idea of being able to kind of learn these skills at Quantico, which is where the FBI Academy is,
Yep.
it really opened my eyes to kind of a whole different skill set.
So what was the academy like at Quantico? What kind of transformation, and is it paramilitary?
Yeah, I would say it's kind of a mixture between law school and boot camp, right? So you're in class all day learning constitutional law and investigative techniques, and then you go out to the firing range to learn how to shoot a variety of different guns, and then you go to the gym to learn how to fight in various ways, and then you go to the dorms and just kind of collapse and fall asleep,
Yeah.
because you're living there.
Right.
When I went through, it was 16 weeks. Now it's 20 weeks.
And why is it longer now? Just more.
9/11 changed everything. I think the FBI management felt that the training at the FBI Academy, the kind of basic training for agents, was a little light on the national security stuff and a little heavy on the criminal stuff. 9/11 happens. It's important to understand how to do intelligence investigations rather than just build a criminal case. And so they extended the academy by several weeks.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So
Yeah.
you went. What year did you go through the academy?
95.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
So you saw a lot of changes happen in your first 10 years of your career.
Yeah, we can talk about it, but the 9/11 attacks turned my career around, turned everybody's career around. I mean, we were
Right.
basically big city police detectives who had to become a national security intelligence agency.
Wow. So what was that like post 9/11? I mean, where were you on 9/11?
I was in Chicago, and I was working on a bank fraud squad at the time, investigating people who ripped off banks without a gun. And I remember sitting there that day, and I was waiting for my friend Chris to get in because we were going to go out and confront a subject of one of my cases, a long forgotten case. I don't remember what it was.
Yeah.
And Chris called me and said, "Hey, I'm going to be a little late, but man, are you watching the news?" I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "A plane just flew into the World Trade Center in New York." And I was thinking like a little Cessna or something like that.
Right.
And I was like, and I asked him, he goes, no, I think it's like a big jet. And I go, get out of here. So I go running down the hallway to the conference room where we had a TV. And this is largely pre-internet, 2001. And I start calling my squad mates in. I'm like, you guys got to watch this. And we're watching this. We just see this gaping hole in the World Trade Center. And then as we're watching live, the second plane flew into the second tower.
Right.
And an agent on my squad named Brian, who is smarter than I am, an older guy, he said, guys, we're all terrorism agents today. This is going to change everything. And he's right. It
Right.
did.
Wow. That's what I was going to ask. So, I mean, was it all hands on deck?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what, I've heard from other people that were in, intelligence spaces and things like that, even if it wasn't their kind of thing. And like for you, you're dealing with numbers and financial crimes, and all of a sudden, bam, terrorism hits. Did they put you in some kind of financial role in that, trying to find out who financed this, trying to find out that kind of thing? Or was it straight counterterrorism.
Yeah, in the immediate aftermath, like the day of, they set up a command post and you begin running down the leads. Chicago, where I was where United Airlines was based, and I think a couple of the flights were United flights, and so we were busy going through the flight manifest, find out who did it, who was on board, like every single person on board, run a background check on them. Let's find out who they are, and then we started seeing commonalities with some of the Arab names on there. That these are people who had been, intelligence now tells us that they had been trained in Afghanistan, and we began kind of connecting the dots with that.
Right.
But we're also running down leads because, again, I'm working in the shadow of the Sears Tower, and it was a scary time, Kevin, because nobody knew what was going to happen next.
Yeah.
Right. Like you're watching these two planes fly, and then you hear the Pentagon, a plane flew into that, and then there's a plane that got forced down in Pennsylvania. And so we thought maybe this was the front end of just a series of attacks that was going to last for months. Turned out it was that day. And so you were out there knocking on doors and covering leads that had to do with the terrorist attack itself, but also leads that were coming in from the public.
Right.
Much of which were absolute horseshit, right? We'd get calls from people saying, hey, my neighbor's real shady. And, just gets they're Muslim or whatever. And you go and you talk to the Muslim family, and they couldn't be more nice and patriotic and absolutely shocked by what happened. And so, but we still ran all those leads down. And so that lasted weeks. And then I got pulled from my bank fraud squad and put on to a counterterrorism squad, which was a terrorism financing squad to try to stop the money from flowing to Al Qaeda and other terrorist organizations.
Right. Yeah. So from your perspective, do you think that 9/11 was an intelligence failure?
Absolutely. Without question, that the FBI and the CIA were not sharing information very well, and they were stovepiping information within their agencies. There was, there was information out there about these guys who were going to flight school and had very little interest in learning how to land the plane. Mm-hmm. And the FBI just did a very poor job of connecting the dots, as did the CIA. And so that's why the reforms that have taken place over the past 20-something years have been so important to making sure that Americans and the world is kept safe through better communications among the agencies.
Yeah, well, I mean, and also when you look at surveillance now versus pre-2001, with the NSA and everything we've learned through Snowden and things like that, there's nothing that's hidden if it's near a phone, right? Like, would you agree or?
Yeah, I mean, I think particularly when it comes to international stuff, I don't have a great visibility into what the NSA does on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
The Snowden revelations were a revelation to me as well.
Of course.
And so but yeah, I think we pretty much have things covered. The one thing that still keeps, the FBI agents awake at night is the idea of a lone wolf attacker, right? Mm-hmm. Some guy who was inspired by watching ISIS videos on YouTube who decides he's going to do just a mass casualty event. That's happened, right? Yeah. But as soon as you get several people who are kind of chit-chatting and kind of making plans, you hope that the human intelligence, the informants we have out in the community, combined with the electronic intelligence of monitoring calls to overseas, might produce enough intelligence where we could prevent those attacks.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's just a crazy dystopian world we live in now with all the technology and everything. But so looking at what's happening with the border and what's popular in the news and people coming out from the FBI and people in politics saying that we're vulnerable for another 9/11 style attack, right? An intelligence failure. We're tied up with Israel. We're tied up with Ukraine. We're tied up with Taiwan. Do you think that we're vulnerable from your perspective? And again, guys, he's not speaking from the point of view of anything related to the FBI. Anything that he's saying is his own opinion, nothing related to the government. I'm sure you want to make that a disclaimer.
Yeah, I don't speak for the FBI anymore. Yeah. I work for myself.
Yeah, so I just want to make this clear. Anything that he's saying is not the FBI saying it, even though the clips may look like that. It is him saying it. So I just want to make that clear. But do you think that there's some kind of, do you think we're vulnerable for something like that?
I think not having good intelligence about the people entering our nation is a danger. Whether it's a danger because it's going to increase crime, whether it's a danger because it's going to create an economic problem, or whether it's a danger from a national security perspective, not for me to say. I can't see the future. But the idea that there are people from many different countries pouring into the U.S. who have not been fully accounted for should scare every American.
Yeah, and it's not just like they're coming from Honduras or Mexico or,
I got a call from a client the other day, an attorney who represents several people from the Ukraine and Russia who were picked up coming across the border from Mexico. Mm-hmm. They're seeing this as a means by which to get into our country. And these guys happened to be like picked up, and she was looking for help, and I declined her because it's not what I do. But it was, but it was it was an eye opener for me, right? Because it's difficult to know in this politically charged world right now,
Yeah.
the news and the stuff you see on social media. Is this right wing propaganda? Is this left wing propaganda? Or is this something that's actually happening?
Right.
And from that call and some of the things I've seen, it appears that this is something that's actually happening. These aren't just Guatemalans and Mexicans coming across the border so they could work in the bean fields or whatever.
Right.
These are people from all over the world who are coming into the US because they see a vulnerable entryway.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's just I always wonder, it's like you wish you can have that hindsight before something happens, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's going to have ramifications to us. It already is when it comes to housing and kind of social services. The question then is this: are we putting ourselves vulnerable for more street crime, for more, which I think we've seen a bit of, and for a potential attack? Again, I just don't know. I've been out of the game for a couple of years.
Yeah, well, I don't think we need to be worried about people coming in from out of the country for street crime. It's already happening.
Well,
you
yeah,
know?
yeah, exactly,
It's,
exactly.
yeah. So you were on Matthew Cox's show. That I thought was very interesting. I watched the first half of it, and I thought it was interesting because you're an FBI agent that studied financial crimes, right?
Yeah.
That was your whole gig. He was on the other side of the table being investigated by the FBI and all of that. So ended up going to prison for mortgage fraud, I think. So what was that like from your perspective, sitting across from the table with somebody who it's just probably not something you thought would happen back
That's
in
why I accepted the
95.
invitation. I thought it would just be such an interesting conversation to talk to have a former FBI agent whose specialty is white collar crime, and a former white collar crime criminal sitting across the table having a dialogue. And I thought it was a very nice conversation. I don't have any problem with Matt or anyone else who's kind of paid their debt to society, turned their lives around, and is trying to make an honest living. I don't think that any crime where there's a sentence that's over, everybody deserves a second chance. And Matt's a perfect example of someone who's been reformed and someone who's doing great things right now, educating the public whereas he used to be a con artist.
Yeah, of course. Now, do you think that people with that kind of profile type, are they sociopaths that can get through? I mean, obviously very, very charismatic, but do you see a trend in people that are committing these kind of financial crimes where they go in, they're very good at communicating with people, they're very charming, and they end up getting what they want and then getting out. And even when they get caught, like I've heard of a story where he got caught. I think their internal team at the bank was investigating him and they're getting ready to report him to the FBI. And I think he figured out a way to get them to stop and pay them back or something. I don't remember the outcome, but do you think that people that commit those kind of crimes, are they just everyday people, or do you think there is some kind of profile type like being a sociopath or something?
I think there's two types. There's the people who are just full-time con artists, and this is what they do for a living. They steal from other people by gaining their confidence, right? That's the con and con artist.
Right.
And so, but I'd say they're a minority. I think most of the people who commit white collar crimes are opportunists. They're people who see a vulnerability, see an ability to make some money, and then they tell themselves lies that allow themselves to look at themselves in the mirror each day. And let me put it this way: no one is the villain in their own life story.
Right.
Right. So every embezzler, every Ponzi schemer that I ever investigated, they were able to justify and rationalize what they were doing because, I'm stealing the money from the teller drawer at the bank, but I'm not really stealing it. I'm just borrowing it. I need the money. And eventually when my ship comes in, when the lottery hits me, I'm going to return that money and no one will ever know. And my expertise, though, was identifying what is that thing that how do they tell themselves? What are they telling themselves to rationalize their illegal activity? I figure that out and then I turn that on them and say, well, were you stealing this money so you could go out and party and use drugs? Or were you stealing this money because you had this extraordinary need for money because of the circumstances of your life and you intended to pay it back? And so if you're able to give them that A-B choice, they're always going to choose the choice that doesn't make them look like a monster.
Yeah, I've seen that in interrogation videos when police are trying to get somebody to admit and confess to a murder. They're like, listen, were you just stressed? Or did you do this because you were a toxic monster? Like, well, I was just stressed. Like,
Right, exactly. And so you make the conversation about their motivation and rationale rather about whether they did it or not. It's like assuming the sale. Like, we know you did it. I just want to know why you did it.
Yeah.
Is it because you wanted to really, really hurt this little girl, or is it because things got out of hand?
Right.
And you made a mistake and you did something you could regret. And if you had a time machine, you'd go back and do it very differently. That's right. And then you cop to it.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, it's very similar to like sales and influence. And So let's talk about body language and your favorite part about it, which is the interrogations and the mental games. So what is it that leads you to be able to understand when somebody is lying? Would you say that body language is like 80% of it, or
No.
okay?
I mean, there's people out there who have expertise in that. I don't.
Okay.
When I was trained in 1995, there was all sorts of horse shit they would tell us, like if your eyes moved up and to the left, it meant you were looking for an answer and you were lying. But that's been tested again and again and again, and it just doesn't bear out. To me, there's no substitute for knowing the facts of the case before you walk into an interview, right? So I want to know every single thing about this case. I want to know every piece of evidence. I don't want to be just catapulted into an interview without being prepared. And so for me, that preparation is there,
Sure.
and giving me a sense of comfort that this person actually did it. And then you could kind of take a look at their body language and set a baseline. What are they like?
Yeah.
Is this person a fidgety person by nature when you're talking to them about the Super Bowl?
Right.
Or is this person totally cool, but then when they start lying, they start fidgeting? So
Right.
I believe in that kind of body language, but
Yeah.
I don't believe in sort of the let's watch and see if his eyes go up and to the left or down and to the right. To me, that's just, there's no basis in reality for that.
Of course, yeah. So this must happen in your whole life. Like I'm sure you investigated me before coming here. I'm sure you watched my body language and looked for a baseline because it's natural for you to do that with everybody. Is that right? Or
Yeah, I mean, you seem like a cool guy. I mean, I'm not looking to get anything from you other than have
Yeah.
a good conversation. So I didn't really spend a whole lot of time doing a proctology exam on you. But
yeah,
I watched your show, got a feel for you, realized that you're a legitimate, interviewer, and you got a great style, and so that was enough to give me a sense of comfort to hop on a plane and come here to Atlanta.
yeah. So I'm curious, what kind of investigating did you do into me? Because if I were you, I would, before going somewhere, I would want to know like, who is this guy? What's their reasoning for this?
I'm going to be very disappointing to you. I just literally watched your clips and got a sense of comfort that your show is good. I'm really, between you and I, Kevin, I don't really care if you're a good person or a bad person. We're going to spend 90 minutes together.
Yeah.
I know you're very good at spending 90 minutes with somebody and making them feel comfortable and having a really stimulating conversation. It kind of begins and ends with me there. Like, I don't care how many speeding tickets you have or if you're,
I don't mean like that. I mean like like if I were in your position and somebody invited me, maybe I'm just paranoid by nature. If I was an FBI agent, I would always wonder. But I did see something that you said which was phenomenal. I believe it was on the show that we just talked about, but you said somebody asked you, do you ever worry about people hurting you, like trying to come back? And you were like, why would they? It's such a waste of their time.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of a Hollywood trope, right? Is that the guy is sitting in prison, like staring at my photo, just
Yeah.
can't wait till he gets out so he can like murder me and my family. The reality of the situation is most people just want to do their time, get out, and move on with their lives. There's not a whole lot of motivation to.
Yeah.
But as a practical matter is, I never treated anyone poorly, Kevin.
Yep.
When I was investigating people, I treated everybody with tremendous amount of respect. I was kind to them. I was compassionate. I did everything I could to see the world through their eyes and understand the motivations for what they were doing. And I never lied to them or about them in court. I never testified falsely against somebody. They know what they did. And the reason they tell me what they did is because I'm being kind to them. I'm being compassionate. That's how I get people to confess to me.
Right.
It's not because I'm screaming at them. There's no good cop, bad cop bullshit.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's just a matter of, and so there's no real rationale. I mean, some of the criminals that I investigated sent me Christmas cards from prison,
Yep.
and some of them said that I was the first person who was ever kind to them and actually truly wanted to listen and understand them. And I was doing it for my own selfish purposes to make the case, but that's just the way I behave with people. And so I haven't really given anyone a motivation to get out of prison and like cut my head off on the internet.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Have you ever read the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People?
Yeah, I read it. My dad gave it to me when I was a little kid, and I read it and sort of absorbed it. And I feel like I've read it every 10 years of my life since then.
Yeah. It's one of the most important books that I've ever read in terms of just how I communicate with people. What takeaways do you have from that book that helped you in your FBI career?
Not making the conversation about yourself, right? Talking to them, becoming not faking interest in people, but
Yeah.
becoming genuinely interested in people. Using people's name. I think I've actually done it a couple times, Kevin, during this conversation
Yeah.
because it's sweet.
Makes me feel really
It's
comfortable.
exactly. It's a sweet thing for your ears to hear. Smiling and kind of being nice and friendly and kind of being a positive, upbeat person. And if you're working with a team, allowing them to take credit for the work. If the FBI is really good at that when we work with local authorities to make sure that we're putting their chief of police on the stage for the press conference before our special agent in charge does.
Yep.
And building people up, not tearing them down. I think all those things go a long way toward making people like you and you don't have to fake it after a while. It just becomes your personality.
Right. Yeah. I mean, everybody, like you said, nobody's the villain in their own movie. They're always the superhero, right?
Yeah, or the person. Here's the example I like to use. You're in traffic. A guy cuts you off. You think, man, what a jerk that guy is. He must be a terrible person. That guy's just a total bad guy. But you're late for work, and you cut someone off. You're not doing it because you're a bad guy. You're doing it because you're reacting to the circumstances of your life.
Right.
So you've granted yourself all this charitable outlook on why you did something bad, but that other guy, you're not showing him any charity whatsoever.
Yep.
If you're willing to understand that most people aren't villains, they're just reacting to the circumstances of their lives, then I think you're going to be a lot better person, and I think you're going to be a lot better of an investigator. And then if you can get yourself into that, what are those circumstances that drive people to do bad things, you can have a lot of success in getting people to confess to you.
Sure. And then, so it's kind of cool because do you think that you see a lot of similarities in between that little tiny habit going all the way up to like a large financial crime?
Without
or
question.
anything?
Yeah, exactly. So, I've had Ponzi schemers who ripped off, like millions of dollars from hundreds of people. And, and I always talk to them. And when I do, I say, listen, this probably didn't start out as a Ponzi scheme when you did it, right? You thought you would be able to actually make money somehow and get these people paid. In fact, you did pay them, but you just had to pay, but you owed them money and you had to pay them from the investments of other people as opposed to the trading, which you thought you'd be able to do. And that was an unfortunate reality, but at least you were paying them, right? So I could see how you could sleep at night feeling good about yourself for actually paying these people the returns you said you were going to do. And they always agree with me. And then we kind of go down the road. Like, well, you understand there's a problem with that. It's what's called a Ponzi scheme. They're like, yeah. And I go, but you didn't set out to do a Ponzi scheme. It just kind of turned out that way, right?
Right.
Like, yeah. And so whether that's the truth or not, it's how they see themselves. And that's key, right? And so getting into their headspace and understanding how people see themselves, you're going to have a lot of luck getting people to talk to you, even when it's against their legal self-interest.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The human nature. And again, like understanding what makes people tick, I think is probably the most important thing.
Absolutely. It's everything. It's the whole ball game.
Right. Do you think that people are more emotional or more logical,
Emotional.
especially when there's pressure? Right.
Without question. Yeah.
Okay.
And I wish people were more logical and rational like you and I, but most people like us. But I think most people are emotional, and when someone does a violent act, had a guy throw his girlfriend off a cruise ship, and I had to interrogate him. And the angle I was playing was, listen, I understand you didn't get on this cruise ship with the intention of throwing your girlfriend over your balcony railing. You got on this cruise ship because you wanted to have a nice time with her. Then you guys got into a terrible fight. You were drinking, and she was driving you up the wall. She was coming at you, fighting you, and she wouldn't stop. She kept going and going and going. And at the time, the only thing you could do to shut her up was to kind of grab her and push her against the railing and lift her up, and she went over the railing. Is that what happened? Because you don't seem like the kind of guy who went on this cruise to kill her so you could get the insurance money. Which was it? Was this a fight that got out of hand? And he admitted it was a fight that got out of hand. And he ended up going to prison for that.
Did he end up reverting back to it was about the insurance money, and that was like kind of a
no? It was never.
stepping
It was
stone?
never about the insurance money. But
Okay.
what I'm doing is I'm trying to create a monstrous option, and versus what probably actually happened.
Right. And knowing the details of the case before helps you line that up.
Absolutely, right? Because you hear from the people in the cabin next door that that there was an argument going on, and so you're able to kind of build out what probably happened, come up with a theory, but then allow him to tell you what happened and give him that moral out. And so he was a guy who was reacting emotionally, right? And there's probably some truth to it, right? He probably got in a fight with her. He was drunk. He's a guy who probably should never, ever drink.
Yeah.
And you know those people, right? The nicest guy in the world, but then when he starts drinking, he's taking a swing at you. We all have some asshole friend who's like that.
Sure.
And, and then this fight just got out of hand and the girl went over the edge.
That's deep.
Emotions, the guy, talking to the guy, it's like you and I talking. Nicest guy in the world, very calm, intelligent, but he made this terrible, terrible mistake because he was drunk and fighting with his girlfriend. And he reacted emotionally. Like he doesn't rationalize this as something that, he doesn't rationalize this with logic. He rationalizes his action with emotion. She drove me to do this.
And same thing as in traffic when you cut people off.
You got to see the world from other people's eyes. They're reacting to the circumstances of their lives. They're not villains like we see on TV and in Marvel movies.
Right. So let's talk about some of the gurus, right? There's a big trend in gurus getting hit by FTC and things like that because they like, have an investment fund or they sell a course that's misleading or something like that, right? There's these big famous people on YouTube where the attention is flowing and they're grabbing people's money and they're getting in trouble. Did you deal with any of that kind of stuff? Like, I know you deal with Ponzi schemes and stuff like that.
Most of my cases were embezzlements and investment frauds and what I call advanced fee schemes, like lottery scams or romance scams. I didn't deal with a whole lot of kind of mass marketing frauds. I'm trying to think if any of my subject to my investigations had a media presence. Maybe. Okay, yeah. There was a guy named Dan Doyle. He was out of Hawaii. And after Hurricane Katrina hit back in 2003, 2004, 2004, 2005, the state of Mississippi offered fantastic financial benefits for people who wanted to invest in real estate, the tax benefits, invest in real estate in like Biloxi, because it was destroyed and they're trying to rebuild kind of low income housing and stuff. And so Dan Doyle was one of these guys who had a podcast, an early podcast before it was video, that was also a radio show. And so he was one of these Saturday morning financial radio shows that was syndicated throughout California. A lot of people don't realize that those shows are not syndicated the way like Rush Limbaugh was back in the day. But they're infomercials.
Sure.
Dan is paying for time to put his, but the whole idea was that there's tremendous opportunities to invest in real estate in Mississippi. And if you call Dan Doyle's office in Hawaii, he can kind of get you tied into that. And basically you're sending money to Dan Doyle for an investment in real estate in Biloxi, Mississippi that has tremendous tax benefits.
Got it.
He was a guru, right? He was a guy who people liked and respected. He was very good on the air, had a very successful podcast, and he was just stealing people's money.
So he wasn't investing it at all?
Not a penny. He was spending it on himself and paying off his personal debts.
Wow. Okay. So how does somebody like Dan Doyle do that? I mean, did he start with that intention?
I think not. I think Dan felt that he had all this money coming in the door and he had debts to pay. And so he began paying off his debts with the idea that he was going to take some of that money and put it into real estate, but it just never, ever happened because, one, it was difficult to do. It wasn't anywhere near as simple as he was presenting it.
Right.
But my theory on Dan lawyered up, so I never got a chance to actually talk to him.
Yeah.
And then he died after we indicted him. And so my theory on Dan, in the way I would have approached him had I had that opportunity to interrogate him, would have been that you had tremendous financial pressures, and in order for you to continue your business that would have gotten everyone paid back eventually, you needed to take care of your financial pressures first. So you were taking investment money and you were kind of keeping your business alive.
Right.
Because if your business fails, Dan, it's nothing. Everybody loses. But if you can keep your business alive long enough to begin investing people's money, making money, and getting people paid back, it wouldn't have been a fraud at all. Everyone would have made money. Is that right, Dan? That would have been my approach. Now, I don't believe what I'm saying, right? Because the fact of the matter is if someone gives you money to invest that money and you do anything other with it other than invest that money, you're committing a fraud, right? Fraud is theft by deception. You have deceived these people to separate them from their money. And, but using that but I'm positive that's how Dan rationalized his behavior, right? He was a guy who lived 2 miles from me, had kids, had a nice house on the water in Kailua, Hawaii. And, this wasn't, Dr. Evil. He was just a guy who saw an opportunity, made some money, and began spending it on himself rather than investing it.
How did he die? Heart attack?
Liver failure.
Oh, well, really?
Yeah.
Drinker?
Don't know. Like I said, I never got an audience with him. He lawyered up as soon as I went to go try to talk to him, which is kind of game over for me as far as my ability to interrogate him.
Right.
And then we indict him, and then he comes in, fingerprints, photographs, doesn't talk to us, which is fine.
Yeah.
And then during the course of the plea negotiations, he goes into the hospital and then dies.
Now, do you think that when people lawyer, so I know that when somebody gets hit with a federal crime, it's almost certain that if they fight it, they don't settle, they fight it, they're going to go to prison. It's like a 90%.
Yeah, we crush everybody because we're not bringing the charges at the FBI until we can prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt.
Right.
And the check and balance on that is not the ethics and great investigating of the FBI. It's the prosecutors at the U.S. Attorney's Office, the
Right.
federal prosecutors. They're not going to take. They're not in the business of losing cases, so they
Yeah.
want this thing tied down.
Well, and they're
before
the
you-
best of the best, right?
They're excellent lawyers, yeah, and most of them serve for 2 or 3 years and then spin off and become high-priced defense attorneys, making my life miserable.
Yeah.
But for that window of time that we have them working for the Department of Justice as prosecutors, they're super good and super aggressive and very conservative, not in political sense, but conservative in the idea that they're not going to take a case with any holes in it whatsoever. They're going to run the agents ragged with to-do lists.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's good, right? Because then you have enough. And I heard you say something where that I really liked is when you go and arrest somebody, you're not trying to get somebody who you think is guilty. Like you want to know the facts before, and you want to know they're guilty before, or at least have enough data and enough knowledge on the case to know that you're not putting away the wrong person.
Right. There's exactly particularly in the world of financial crimes, there's very little margin for error, right? Because the bank at this point, I've talked to the victims, I've talked to the witnesses, I've looked at the bank records, I have an understanding of the flow of money. So there's really no opportunity for me to kind of get it wrong at that point. And which is why very few of my cases actually ever went to trial. Everybody
Yeah.
just pleads guilty.
Well, everything's so trackable, right? Like especially
Yeah. And so it's there may be some mitigating circumstances as to why they do it or what happened with what they did with the money and stuff like that. But you have an understanding of that. So by the time I'm putting handcuffs on a financial criminal, it's game over for them. I know what the story is. There's nowhere for them to go. They can try to drag it out as long as they want through the plea negotiations and by kicking the trial into the future. But that's the prosecutor's problem, not mine.
Right. Okay. Interesting. So did you ever work other than post 9/11, did you ever work outside of the financial crimes? Like, did you?
Yeah, I did. I did some political corruption cases.
Okay.
And
There's political corruption?
you'll be shocked to find that not every
thought
elected
they
not
were-
every elected and government official is a good and honorable person.
Oh,
You'll
okay.
be shocked to learn
That's
that.
news. Okay. Sorry. Threw me off.
Yeah, so I've done a couple stints on political corruption and governmental corruption squads, and I've been called upon to help out on various violent crimes, often as the interviewer and interrogator, or just another warm body on a case with missing children or missing women or whatever. And
Right.
so I worked a lot of those cases kind of as one-offs because the FBI is just very collaborative and cooperative, and they're always willing to kind of grab an agent to help out. And the culture of the FBI is such that we help out our colleagues a lot.
Got it. Now, did you ever work alongside the CIA and other government agencies?
No, I mean, in the post 9/11 era, I was briefed by them and I provided them briefings.
Yeah.
Because there was this huge push to share information with them because it was clear that we had done a very poor job of that before 9/11.
Yep.
And but I was never really called upon. They can't operate in the U.S., right? So they're not coming like out on interviews with me on cases.
Right.
And my trips overseas were pretty benign, and so I wasn't really rolling with them.
The CIA now can operate in the U.S., right? No?
No, I mean they can do analysis. They're like they're at Langley in Virginia,
Yeah.
but they're not allowed to do any operational work in the U.S. By charter.
Got
would
it.
be illegal.
Okay. CIA would never do anything illegal, right?
Well, I can't speak for them. I don't work with them.
Yeah.
But one thing I can tell you is that I just never encountered them. But again, understand that most of my time was in financial crime, so they don't really care about like the pissant little embezzlement case that I'm working in in Florida or Hawaii. And
Yeah.
So there's no opportunity for them to kind of rub shoulders with me there.
yeah.
But you get to know these guys, at briefings and stuff like that. I went to a CIA wedding once. Very nice people.
Yeah. That's cool. So was it like James Bond?
No, it was like a bunch of
Regular wedding?
yeah, it was very much a regular wedding.
Yeah.
Chicken dance, Macarena. Yeah.
When I talk to people from the CIA, it seems like there's this almost like a police firefighter relationship between the two agencies, right? Where it's kind of they don't like each other.
I think that's Hollywood. Again, perhaps maybe on the national security side.
Yeah.
But their mission is just so different than ours.
Right.
And so I mean they're out there gathering intelligence overseas. I mean they are spies.
Yeah.
We're inside the U.S. and our job's really to be the spy catchers to identify, monitor, and perhaps arrest and expel spies that are inside the U.S. That's what the FBI foreign counterintelligence squads do. And so there's not a whole lot of overlap between what they do and what we do. I mean, if they can provide us intelligence about someone who's a bad actor overseas, who's now coming to the U.S. for a vacation, for something like that, they can hand that case off to us and we'll take the national security part of the investigation while that person's stateside. Other than that, there's not a whole lot to fight about.
Sure. So let's talk about that, right? Like, how do you spot a spy? Because I think I had a conversation with one of my friends and I said, look, a spy is not somebody that's going to look like a spy. A spy is just an intelligence gatherer, right? It could be
Yeah.
a cleaner in a building, it could be a CEO at a company, it could be anybody that's gathering intelligence. But from your perspective,
Mhm.
since you've worked a little bit in counterterrorism, how do you spot a spy?
A spy working inside the U.S. Ends up getting caught because of their communication patterns, because they are contacting someone from the mothership back home, whether that's China or Russia or one of the other threat nations, and that information is being monitored in some way.
Got
And
it.
so then we're identifying. Then the NSA or the CIA will then notify the FBI and say, "Hey, that cleaning lady at the Pentagon, there may be an issue with her."
Yeah.
And then we begin to look into her, and it becomes a very quiet proctology exam where we want to know every aspect of her life and find the information that she's gathering and what she's doing it. And for the people who've committed actual espionage who are members of the U.S. military, it's almost always that as well.
Right. So, what is it like to stake out somebody? You know, what is it like going undercover and watching people, surveilling people?
Right. Well, there's undercover is a very different thing, but I think what you're talking about is surveillance.
Yeah. So, I mean, unmarked car, watching somebody
Yeah.
sitting in the Ford Fusion across the street.
Right.
kind of
It's
thing.
incredibly boring, right? So everybody, I talk about surveillance because I do a bit of that still as a private investigator now.
Yeah.
And surveillances are insanely boring, and people don't understand that. They're like, "Oh my God, it must be so exciting." It's moments of excitement where the person's driving and you're following and trying not to get burned, and then it's a lot of staring at a car or staring at a front door of a house from a distance, waiting for it to open while they're just having a Netflix and chill evening, and you're in a car either freezing to death or burning up, hungry, and you got to pee.
Yeah. And you can't get out.
No, I mean, usually you're on a team. Again, as a private investigator, I do a lot of surveillances alone.
Right.
But when you're on a surveillance team for the FBI, you got several different cars, and so you just take shifts as far as who's watching the door, who's watching the car, or else you would just go totally stir crazy if you had to like stare at a door for 8 hours.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, the human brain can't do it, right? I mean, it can do it, I guess, but
It's just asking a lot of the agent.
well, now with cameras, has that changed? Is there a lot less human surveillance and more post up a camera on a tree pole or
You
something?
could, yeah. I mean, it's an option, but then you're kind of losing you still need humans. Maybe you can fall back a block or two if there's some kind of electronic surveillance going on also.
Right.
But then you have to have some poor bastard agent staring at their phone or at a computer screen, waiting for the person to get out and get in their car, and then everyone's scrambling to make sure you can choke them off when they leave their homes.
Yeah, got it.
So
Okay.
it doesn't it allows you to fall back, but it doesn't solve the problem of needing an actual human to watch that screen so you can start following that person once they get on the road.
Got it. Okay. So how do you tell if somebody's following you? You know, if the average person thinks that, and I'm not saying like if you're being
Yeah.
tailed by an agent, but I mean like if somebody is following somebody home, like what are some of the things that people should look out for?
If someone's taking more than 2 or 3 turns with you, that should be a red flag.
Got it. Okay. So right turn, right turn, right turn, right turn.
Yeah, I mean, in most of the time, in fact, there's a fun experiment for your viewers. If you're listening to this while you're in your car, don't look in your rearview mirror, but ask yourself, do you know what the car is that's right behind you? Most people are going to say no.
Yeah.
Most people just aren't paying attention to the car that's behind them, and the surveillance agents or stalker is counting on that. Is counting on the idea that you're not paying attention to what's behind you, and it makes it easier for them to follow you.
Well, and like you said, you know, most people, most government agents, what's the car called that you get? What's the term for it?
The FBI calls them BU cars. It's short
car.
for a bureau car.
Okay, got it. Okay. So I left a comment that got thousands of likes or a bunch of likes on one of your videos where I said 50% chance it's a Ford Fusion. And people seem to really like that.
Yeah, I mean, my BU cars are some real jalopies over the years.
Yeah. So, but they blend in. That's the whole point. Is they're regular American sedans that blend in.
Yeah. We're not. It's not like the TVs where the FBI just
Ferrari.
driving like a Ferrari
Yeah.
or a Lamborghini.
Miami Vice.
I wish.
Yeah.
That'd have been great.
Yeah. But what are some things that people don't know about the job, like working as an FBI agent? So for me, somebody who's obviously not affiliated with the government, what is it like from my perspective that I'm missing? You know, what are some cool things about the job that people don't know?
Cool things about the job of an FBI agent that they don't know. I'm trying to think. You get a car, you get to take it home, which is kind of a nice economic benefit, but you can't use it for anything other than work. So
Right.
your kid, you want to drop your kid off at school, no dice. Can't
Yeah.
use your FBI car for that. You want to put a trailer hitch on it and bring your trailer out to the, your cabin in Wisconsin to go, camping for the weekend. No dice. Can't do that. And so a bureau car that you get to bring home is a tremendous economic benefit, right? Because it's got paid for gas, you're not paying for insurance, and your commute is covered. And the reason we do that is because the agents have to be on call 24/7. You got to be able to respond if something bad should happen.
Right.
But it's a trap also because you get 6 weeks suspension if you're caught misusing the car.
Do people do that a lot? Like, is
People get busted for it. Yeah, it happens.
how would you? It's like it's the FBI. Why would you?
It's most agents don't do it because the penalty is so severe. I mean, 6 weeks without pay would have bankrupted me.
But you still have to work.
No, you're on the bricks. Your badge and gun and credentials are in your boss's drawer while you're sitting at home waiting for the clock to run out on the 6 weeks.
Ugh.
So most agents just don't mess with that because you're playing with fire.
Right.
And but it's happened. Everybody knows somebody who's got in trouble for misusing an FBI car. But it's a bad move for the agents when they do it. But you asked for something cool. What's cool? I think
Cool or interesting, just something that people don't know.
it's such an open-ended question, Kevin. Because for me, this is what I did every day, 10 hours a day for 26 years. So the stuff that you might find cool was just so commonplace to me.
Yeah.
I mean, the other end of the question would be more interesting for me is what are the things that people might think are cool that's just totally benign and the paperwork. Like every day that I'm out there doing something really interesting, whether it's a surveillance, an arrest, a search warrant, or interviewing people or interrogating someone, has about the same amount of time with me actually writing it up. Because
Right.
if I can't create the paperwork in the case file describing exactly what I did and how I did it and what that person told me, then it's nothing. Then it's just recess. I'm playing because eventually all my paperwork needs to be turned over to the prosecutors and then needs to eventually be turned over to the defense attorney in the discovery process, and which is what induces a plea. And so
Right.
the amount of paperwork involved with being an FBI agent is probably the same as being a big city police detective, but it's absolutely crushing.
Got it. Okay. Yeah.
And so
Because
know,
you have to be very
right,
very,
and they don't show you that on a CBS when you're watching
Yeah.
some FBI police drama, right? It'd be an incredibly boring show to see Agent Simon sitting behind his computer, like writing up a report while I'm hunting and pecking
Yeah.
at the keyboards.
Yeah.
So stuff like that. I think people would also be shocked by by just the normal off-the-shelf technology that the FBI uses for, when you see these FBI field offices on TV, they look like discotheques with screens that pop up out of nowhere.
Yeah,
But
like the Pentagon and underground the Pentagon or
yeah,
something.
yeah. But the reality is that it's just a cubicle farm. And people would contact me every now and then and say, hey man, can I get a tour of the FBI office in Jacksonville or Chicago? And I said, well, you know what? Would you work in an office with a bunch of cubicles? They go, yeah. And I go, then you've
walk
gotten the tour. Because it's not like we have terrorists chained to the walls or there's like a room that I could show you that has the UFOs in it or anything like that. And so the office itself is pretty just a normal kind of cubicle farm. But if the agents are doing their job right, they're not spending a ton of time in the office. They're out on the streets knocking on doors. And that's how you solve cases.
Right. What was, circling back to when you became an agent, what was the hiring process like? I know it's very, very, as you would say, a proctology exam.
Yeah, it was long and miserable is what it was like. So you start by taking an intelligence test. Well, let me go through it now because there's some differences. Now you start, I guess you still start by filling out a basic application. Then you go in and take an intelligence test. Half the people pass that, half the people fail that. And then those people get to have like a meet and greet session with an agent. The agent's really kind of at that point taking a look at your resume and to see, are you a person who is regarded as a highly competitive candidate? So the criminal justice majors are not highly competitive. They're a dime a dozen. The FBI doesn't see that as a competitive major.
Right. But the accountants.
But the accountants, the computer scientists, the mechanical engineers, the people who speak Farsi or Chinese, any of the Chinese dialects or Russian, that's a highly competitive candidate. And so if the agent sort of approves your resume as being highly competitive, then you get to go to the next stage. And that's a panel interview where 3 people are interviewing you for about an hour about the stories from your life. Tell me about a time in your life where you had to blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And so if you pass that, about half the people pass and half the people fail. You also take a written essay exam to make sure you can read and write proper English. And so it's just an essay you're writing basically.
Yep.
And there's a certain amount of people who pass that and a sizable amount of people who fail that. Along the way, periodically, you're taking a physical fitness exam where you were evaluating your ability to do push-ups, sit-ups, a mile and a half run and a 300-meter sprint.
Okay.
And you got to hit your times there, or
You
else.
do a dummy drag too, or no?
No, we don't do
No.
that. Yeah, we should, but we don't. It's push-ups, nonstop push-ups, sit-ups in a minute, a mile and a half run, and a 300-meter sprint. But they're back to back to back.
Yeah.
And so, and a shocking amount of people don't pass that,
Yeah.
which makes no sense to me because it's not a pop quiz. You know exactly what you're going to be tested on, but people show up and fail that more often than not.
Right.
And that's changed over time. I think my generation of agents was passing, applicants were passing at a way higher rate than the current generation. I
Well,
don't.
yeah. Look at. I mean,
What do you think? Because I don't have a good explanation for that.
I think people are not as fit as they were. I think people don't play outside, especially the younger kids. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like I was like the last generation that played outside. You know, when I was younger, I'm 31. When I was younger, it was right when technology was really coming out, but I didn't have video games as a kid. We moved around a lot, but for a long time we lived in Alaska, in very rural, a rural part of Alaska, and we would just go out and just play, you know?
I will allow for that this is a lesser this generation's not as physically fit as 25 years ago. What I don't understand is what's happening psychologically to this generation that's making people show up to a physical fitness test that they're not going to pass.
Yeah. I mean, is it the instant dopamine from other things where doing something hard, people mentally give up sooner? Like, if I want to feel good, I can watch a YouTube video, a TikTok, go watch porn, eat some food, DoorDash, right to the house. I mean, there's a million different things that I can do right now, video games, like anything to get that instant dopamine rush. So pushing through to do something hard, even as simple as just focusing on reading a book, like people read less books, people do less mentally challenging things, I think.
Yeah.
I read a lot less than I used to, you know?
Maybe there's something to that, but it's a phenomenon that I don't understand because there's no way I would have embarrassed myself to showing up to a physical fitness test without one having done it myself first to know I can pass.
Right.
And if I couldn't pass, I would have said, "Listen, I'm not where I need to be. I need another
Come
month
back
to
another
train."
time. Yeah.
But people show up to the FBI physical fitness test all the time and just fail miserably. They had no idea they were actually being called upon to do what was being asked, and I don't understand the psychology behind that. I don't understand why somebody would not have. I would have run this thing in the allotted time on bloody stumps.
Yeah.
I'm not a runner.
Yeah.
And so so it's a weird thing to me that applicants are washing out left and right at the highest rate that we've ever seen in the FBI's history today versus some other day. And I don't understand. And I get what you're saying, and I think people are probably in poorer shape than they were in the past for all the reasons you cited. What I don't understand is the psychological hurdle people are able to get to where they think magically that they're going to be able to pass this thing if they've never passed it before.
Well, you look at it with local police departments, right? You see most of the cops are overweight or obese.
Right.
And could not pass the physical test, the entrance test now if they went through. They don't train jujitsu. They don't train with their firearms. They don't train under pressure. They don't do the things that allow them to do their job under pressure when a critical incident or something like that happens, right? Like their day-to-day routine is pretty you're not running and gunning every day, right?
No, you're in a car writing tickets if you're a patrolman and you spend a lot of time in that car. I get it. Which is crazy because, right, the police spend a lot of time actually training their people on critical incidents, on surviving a shooting and going through all that.
Do they, though?
I think they do. I believe police training is actually fairly good when it comes to that type of thing. However, what the police departments, I think, fail to understand is that an officer is way more likely to die of the complications of type 2 diabetes, a heart attack, a stroke, than they are ever in an encounter with a bad guy.
Right.
But they're not pushing the physical fitness training that would be needed to actually survive that. They're pushing the training, on how to survive a shooting incident. And but I mean, they should do both, is what I'm saying. There's not an either or here, but I'm with you that the physical fitness for law enforcement is just so important. One, as sort of a visible sense of comfort that the public will have when they encounter a law enforcement officer, that this is a person who seems to know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And but two, just from an HR perspective, that it costs a lot of money to retire somebody at age 45 because they've had their second heart attack.
Yeah. Yeah. And the average lifespan of a police officer when they retire at that full 20 years is like 5 to 7 years.
Interesting.
It's crazy, but you think about it. The reason why I bring that up is I think that a lot of people or more emotional and less logical. Like you should, when you finish your shift or before your shift, go work out. You know, a lot of departments have a gym at the department, I'm sure.
FBI does. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you think that it's more just people are lazy, right? They finish, you know, I mean, I get it. Like cops are working a lot of overtime now. So you get done with a 12-hour shift. You don't want to go work out. You want to go home and sleep, you know? Do you think that's it? Or
I've never been a police officer, so
Yeah.
I can't really get inside their heads. But I know the FBI culture is one of physical fitness, and I know the FBI provides agents with a certain amount of hours per week specifically to work out, and they have state of the art gyms in every field office to get those workouts in.
right.
So you know, and the agents are going to just perform better if they're healthier. And so
course.
I think the FBI is investing in their own people, but they're also investing in their own success.
Mm-hmm.
Getting back to the application process.
Yes.
So after you pass your physical fitness test, you pass your interview, then there's a polygraph test, and they're really just testing to make sure you told the truth on your application, that you're not a spy, and that you're
Yep.
in compliance with the FBI drug policy. And if you pass that, then you go to the background check where they do a investigation of you and your past to make sure you're a good and honorable person, you're not a spy, you're acting financially responsible, you're not a druggie. And then if you pass all that, I think you got another physical fitness screening before they send you to Quantico at the FBI Academy, and then you spend 20 weeks there. And there's some amount of people that wash out of the academy for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, of course. So the polygraph, I'm curious about this.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard that you can't use a polygraph against somebody in court. They're not admissible. Is
True.
that right?
That's true.
Okay. So what is a polygraph more to pinpoint where somebody's baseline, like how far they are from their baseline and dive deeper in something? So for instance, you can't necessarily, from what I assume a polygraph is, you can't tell if somebody's lying, but you can tell when something's off enough to know where to dive deep. So if somebody gets nervous around a financial question that's maybe around bank deposits or whatever, and they get their heart rate really goes up, or they're, you know, they sweat a little more, perspiration, or, you know, whatever, right? Is that more where you dive in, or is a
Again,
polygraph?
I'm not a polygrapher, so
Yeah.
let's start there.
Yeah.
But I've had to sit for a polygraph every 5 years of my career, which you know, even as a 50-year-old guy, I was just on pins and needles, nervousness, because it's just an awful feeling, right?
Yeah.
You're hooked up to this machine. There's an agent you don't know. He's not like your friend.
Yeah.
Who's like kind of asking you questions.
Yeah.
And you're measuring your reaction, and you're like, oh my God, am I breathing wrong?
Overthinking everything.
You're overthinking it. You know, if you grew up in Catholic school like me, everything's this mortal sin that's
Yeah.
like coming to light at
Oh
this
my
point.
gosh.
And
Yeah.
so
The Catholic guilt.
I think a lot of the trick of the polygraphers, not the trick, the art of polygraph is the conversation that you have with the polygrapher when you're off the box.
Yeah.
You know, and like you said, you know, I'm seeing some reaction to you with this question about the drug policy. You know, let's talk about that. Were you ever at a party recently where people were using drugs? Could that be in your mind? And then, then they sort of probe that a little bit. And you spend a lot of time putting your mind at ease about the things that you're drumming up as problems, so they can
Right.
put you back on the box and say, okay, except for what we already talked about, are you in compliance with the FBI's drug policy? And so they want you to pass. The FBI, by the time you get to the polygraph, the FBI has invested a lot of time in the applicant
Right.
and in money, flying them to these interviews and stuff like that. And so they're not trying to make you fail out. But if you lied on your application, they need to sort that out and understand what job have you left off your application because maybe you were fired 20 years ago and you didn't want to put that on there.
Yeah.
Or or the drug policy, or maybe you have some contacts with foreign intelligence agents socially that you were uncomfortable mentioning that just needs to be vetted out.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's you're done, right? I mean, that's an
I
immediately.
think there's a conversation to be had with all of those things.
I feel like if somebody lies going through that process, you
But no,
must
if you're
be terminated.
if you walk away from the polygraph at the end of the day and you have lied because you're a tough guy and you're going to like dig your heels in, but it's coming up as deceptive, you're not getting the job.
Yeah.
In fact, you're not getting any job in the intelligence services.
Yeah. Well, they've got to be able to trust you, right? In any job like that.
That's the whole ball game.
Yeah. So what's the most interesting case that you've worked on?
You mean of kind of global importance, or which case did I enjoy the most? Or
Yeah. What really, I mean, sure, of global importance, and then maybe one that you liked.
I was a high volume guy, right? So I worked like hundreds and hundreds of cases that weren't particularly globally significant, right? Embezzlements, Ponzi schemes, frauds of various kind. And that's how I got good at what I did, was because I'm working sheer volume. Whereas the people who are working some giant important case, like, the 9/11 attacks, that's going to take 10 years of their lives and half
Yeah.
their career working one big case. I was a volume guy. So I was dealing with 20 cases at a time. with losses between $200,000 and $20 million there. But occasionally cases would pop up that were of significance. After the 9/11 attacks, I was put onto a squad that was investigating a couple Islamic charities that were taking money from good Muslim people for their tithing called zakat. And instead of actually using that money for the poor and needy of the Muslim world, as was promised to their donors, they were funneling that money to Muslim fighting groups, including Al Qaeda.
Wow.
And so our job was to dismantle those charities, take their assets, shut them down permanently to stop the flow of blood money to the terrorists, and deport the guys who were running the charities and put them in prison if we could prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. That's what
Wow.
we did. So that was a big case. It took a few years of my life out. I was the financial nerd on the team and kind of going through the bank records, looking at the expenditures, asking the questions about, why were they buying these hand warmers? And,
Yeah.
and then we would compare that to the wiretaps we had and say, oh, it's clear that they were buying these hand warmers for fighters in Chechnya so their hands could be warm because we have this recording that was recorded by an intelligence service.
Wow.
And so just kind of piecing together the mosaic of evidence to show that they were truly defrauding their donors.
Right.
And so we got a lot of flack from the Muslim community saying, why are you going after our charities?
Yeah.
But I don't think we did a very good job of communicating to the Muslim community that we saw them as victims, right?
Yeah.
Because they weren't donating money for trigger pullers in Chechnya. They were donating that money for the poor and needy as part of their religious convictions.
Right.
So that was a significant case. I investigated some politicians, had some corruption cases in Chicago that were fairly significant as well.
Yeah. Now, do you see a big play in terms of like the financial crimes and funding of terrorism and things? Do you see a big correlation with cryptocurrency? I know you've been kind of, it's not really wasn't big when you were doing it as much, but
On the financial crime side, without question.
Yeah.
The counterterrorism side, I can't really speak to the extent that cryptocurrency is being used to move money. I wouldn't be surprised, but on the fraud side, absolutely. It is the currency of fraud.
Got it. Okay. So is that why the government is kind of not a big fan of cryptocurrency, it seems like?
I don't know that the government has a position on cryptocurrency. If the government truly wanted to shut it down, Congress could pass a law and shut it down. I think crypto is garbage for a lot of different reasons. I think it's a terrible investment. It's not a currency. It never will be. It's basically functions as a Ponzi scheme and a pump and dump scheme. And the only people who are using cryptocurrency to actually conduct transactions are people involved in ransomware and people ripping off little old ladies.
Yeah, there's a lot of that going on. Now, let's talk about money laundering. Did you work doing a lot of money laundering stuff?
Yeah.
Okay. So art. I know that art galleries and the very high ticket pieces of art are often used for money laundering. Is that true?
I haven't seen a lot of that in my experience. It may be true. The idea some drug kingpin is going to put his money into a priceless Monet as opposed to a bank account seems perfectly reasonable to me. Whether he's buying that Monet because he believes it's going to hold value, or whether he's buying it because he thinks it looks lovely on the wall of his mansion in Medellin, it's hard for me to say. I was never a drug agent, so I don't really have a great understanding of how the drug operations work. I've never had a real interest in the war on drugs.
Well, I didn't really say anything about drugs, just in terms of people buying, like for instance, somebody will pay somebody $1 million for a piece of art, but it's really not worth that. But there is, a way for them to get around taxes.
We saw
and things
more
like that.
benign versions of that in Chicago, where the street gangs selling drugs on the drug level would have a hair salon, and they would funnel money into that hair salon, creating the illusion of cash revenue to that small business. And whereas they weren't really cutting much hair or doing much hair at all there. But if you were to take a look at their bank account, it looks like, they have $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 coming in a day, which is way too much for a small South Side of Chicago hair salon.
Yeah.
So we would see stuff like that. I never saw any master criminals putting that money into art as a means by which to hide the money. I just never saw that myself. I'm not saying it doesn't happen though.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And so let's talk about your private investigation
Yeah.
business. You know, what do you do? What's your day to day like?
Sure. It's called Simon Investigations. I'm licensed in Florida, but I do work throughout the country because if I'm in a state that I'm licensed in, I can operate as a private investigator. But any other state and internationally, I can operate as a forensic accountant. And
Nice.
so most of the clients that I have are involved in have been ripped off in financial crimes. And it's either a small company, usually not a huge corporation. I haven't had any huge corporate clients, but a small to mid-sized company who has suffered an embezzlement, let's say, meaning an employee has stolen money from them and they want to gain an understanding of what happened. They want to tighten up their internal controls. They bring me in to investigate it, confront the bad guy, and see if I can recover some of that money, and then package up that investigation into some very organized FBI style reports, and then present it to their board of directors because they need to cover their asses after the company's been ripped off.
Yeah.
And then often shepherd that to the FBI, bring it to my former colleagues there for whatever investigation they deem appropriate.
Right.
The other side of that would be investment fraud. Someone out there is running a Ponzi scheme or an investment fraud scheme. I'll investigate that. I'll look through the bank records. I'll gain an understanding of what happened. I'll take a look at the prospectus. I'll get a feel for the fact that this money was not being invested. I'll create a report. I'll go to the bad guy. I'll tell the bad guy that it's time for him to pay my clients back. If he can't, I'm going to be taking this to my colleagues at the FBI for whatever investigation they deem appropriate.
Yeah.
And I always say, Google me. Google Tom Simon FBI, and you're going to see that I'm for real.
Yep.
And I've gotten a lot of clients' money back that way.
Do people
And
shit themselves?
I think they realize the jig is up at that point,
Yeah.
and that some of them make the decision that the path of least resistance to pay back my client is going to be a lot less hurt in their future. But the problem is there's other victims out there who haven't hired me, and so I'm trying to get my client's money back. And if I can't get my client's money back, I'm going to shepherd this case to the FBI, kind of present it to them in a beautiful package that the agents won't be able to resist.
Yeah.
So then they can work the investigation, which will result in a criminal conviction, which will result in an order of restitution, forcing the bad guy to pay my client back. Either way, my client gets made whole if the person has money to pay it back.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's really good. And it's kind of cool that you've taken your whole experience as an FBI agent and then can continue working almost seamlessly. Is there a big transition for that? And when did you start your business?
I retired on May 31st, 2021.
Oh, so you just retired. I thought it was like almost 10 years. Okay.
I'm not that
got
old,
it.
pal.
No. Well, that's why I was like, you said you retired at 51, like,
Yeah,
right?
I'm 54 now.
Okay,
So, so 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And so so I retired, and then I landed this huge client, this monster client on like June 1st. And I was like, this is how it's going to be.
Yeah,
It's just going to be nonstop clients paying me tons of money to do these investigations. But my first year, it was a lot of like stops and starts and dead periods and all that. And I was still trying to learn the marketing of private investigations.
Well, you're doing great. I mean, you're very big on TikTok, and I mean, how many followers do you have?
I got, as of this recording, about 200,000 on Instagram and about 80,000 on TikTok, and then a lot of LinkedIn. LinkedIn doesn't tally in the same way it does because you have some people who are followers, you have some people who are connections.
Yeah.
And my YouTube has not taken off at all, but that's fine.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, and this is very TikTok-esque kind of content as well. Like it's that kind of mysterious. I don't know. I feel like that kind of stuff does really well on TikTok.
I feel that what I'm doing really is demystifying investigations. I'm giving every day. This came about in sort of an odd way. I started out and I had no idea how I'm going to market these services, right?
Right.
Because going door to door saying want to buy an investigation is a recipe for failure.
Right.
And so I was spending a fortune buying Google ads and ads on like Nextdoor and Facebook, and it was giving me nothing. I was getting, and the cases I was getting from those expenditures was just garbage. And so I thought, what? I have an asset. That asset is 30 years worth of stories of investigations that I've conducted and thoughts regarding investigations and commentary and telling the story of other FBI cases similar to the ones that I work.
Right.
Why don't I produce a 60 to 90 second video every day, Monday through Friday, put it up on all these social media platforms and see if it takes off and see if clients come about. And so that's what happened. And so it's taken off beyond my wildest dreams, and it's given me a steady stream of clients who need my help. And so I'm able to actually do what I love, investigating while actually helping clients and using the social media stuff as a means by which to showcase what I do.
Yeah, and you're really good at it. And like I said, like you You made me laugh earlier when I said you have a voice for radio. Like you really sound like somebody who is just meant to do this style stuff. And you said
I also have a face for
yeah,
radio. So
that's stupid.
yeah, but I don't think I'm a typical TikToker or Instagrammer, right?
That's
Like,
what people like. It's a pattern interrupt.
yeah, well, maybe. Yeah, I don't know why it's taken. I think true crime's hot now.
Yes.
Right.
Oh
And
yeah.
so, like, there's a lot of people out there who are just fascinated by like these stories. A lot of the true crime stories I tell are about financial crimes, and but I also tell the ghastly murder cases and all that. I tend to tell stories from the FBI because that's my background, and I think the FBI often doesn't do a great job of tooting their own horn.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, storytelling hits somebody's brain differently than other kind of content, right? So, the guy that I had on yesterday, we talked a lot about that, and he said storytelling has a much higher impression on the brain. Like people will remember a story much longer than they'll remember just a fact or something like that. Do you think that that's the case?
I think so. I think the ability to kind of tell a story with a beginning, middle, and end is an art, and being able to kind of take a large, complex case and boil it down to 90 seconds. I spend way more time kind of writing and reflecting upon how to tell these stories than I do actually recording and editing it.
Got it. Okay, so there's a whole method to the madness. And I notice that and again, like if you're interrogating somebody, you're taking mental notes along the way and you're coming back to things. And I've noticed in the way that we've talked, you've been able to keep a good track, obviously much better than I am on certain things, right? So there was one thing that you went back to that I had completely forgotten about. And that just made me realize like the way that your brain works and the way that you've done things for so long, how long? 27 years?
No, I guess, I mean, 95
30
I came
now,
out, so
yeah.
yeah, coming up on 30. And
Congrats.
before I was an agent, I was an investigator for a accounting firm called KPMG doing basically what I do now, fraud investigations for
Yeah.
clients. So it's really, at this point, it's not that I'm just not qualified to do anything else. No one's going to hire me to like lay brick or take care of their kids. I'm an investigator. It's all I've ever done since I was 23 years old. And so the idea of me doing anything else right now is pretty unthinkable.
Do you love it?
I do. I mean, every day when I was an agent, I woke up and couldn't wait to go to work because I was going to be doing these exciting things that mattered.
Right.
And the fact that I'm able to do that right now, but instead of working in the interests of justice, I'm able to work for clients and help them out.
Sure.
And so that means the world to me.
So who's your ideal client? If somebody's watching this and maybe they've been a victim of financial crime or, how do they get in touch with you and who is the right person for you and who's the wrong person?
Well, let's start with how they get in touch with me because that's the easy question. They can go to my website, simoninvestigations.com, or they can go to Simon Investigations, at Simon Investigations on TikTok or Instagram, and there's links in my bio as far as how to get a hold of me.
And they're going to be in the description below. So if you're watching this, go follow him, reach out to him, go to his website, wherever you consume the most amount of content, follow him.
Right. So I spend a lot of time talking to people. That's a good bit of my day is spent fielding phone calls from people who have problems. I'm happy to talk to anybody for free and kind of give them my impression. A lot of people want to hire me, and I have to kind of break it to them gently that I need to control their expectations, that maybe I'm not the right guy for this particular assignment, and maybe that a private investigator is not going to solve their problems because people have a misunderstanding. My favorite kind of clients are the people who have been victimized. I own a small business, and there's a guy who works for me, and I just found out he had been using the company credit card to spend just a ton of money on himself, and then he created a false vendor where he was paying himself and creating the illusion that it was an IT company that the company was paying. We really need your help to, one, to make sure this never happens again, and two, to kind of document and quantify this fraud.
Got it.
And then I'll either hop on a plane or hop in my car and drive to them and help them.
Yeah.
When people get ripped off in Ponzi schemes or investment fraud schemes, I'm happy to help them. Lately, I've been doing a lot of these romance scams where someone calls me and says, my mother's a widow. She met a guy on silversingles.com and he doesn't video chat with her, and she's been sending him a ton of money. I don't think he's real.
Yeah.
And I've talked to, and the son will say, I've talked to her and she insists that this is her soulmate and that I need to mind my own business, and she won't listen to me. So I've been doing a lot of interventions with people who have senior citizens in their lives who have fallen for these romance scams because it doesn't make sense, but they're more willing to listen to an outside expert sometimes than even their own kid.
Right.
And then if I can find out where they're sending the money, oftentimes there's middlemen involved here in the US. Perhaps I can go talk to those middlemen and either shut down the flow of money to these bad guys overseas,
Yeah.
or if the timing is good, recover some of that money and get it back to the victims.
Yeah. That's terrible. I cannot imagine. I just can't imagine my mother who, obviously still with my father, but
Yeah.
I can't imagine if my mother went through that, how terrible that would be and how,
Huge problem.
yeah,
I had a case, if you got time for one more story.
as much time as you want.
Yeah, guy, old man in his 90s had been ripped off in this was not a romance scam, but it was another advanced fee scheme, thought he won the lottery. And he'd given something like, and with the trick with you've won this sweepstakes, you've won this lottery. All you got to do is wire this money to us to pay for the taxes and administrative fees. Then we're going to release the $10 million to you. And so the old man had given something like $70,000, $80,000, and his family wanted me to do an intervention with him. So I go and I talk to him, and I convince him that this is a fraud. He kind of buys into that. But then I explained to him that, listen, his phone number and his email address right now are toxic and are being sold on the black market right now to bad guys as part of a sucker list of elderly people who have fallen for frauds, and it's not going to stop. So I sit down with him. We establish a new email address. We get emails out to his family, and his close friends saying, this is my new email address. Don't use my old one. And we're shutting down the old email address. Take him to the Verizon store. We get a new phone number for him, right? The old phone number has been compromised. The bad guys have that number. And, and then we contact the family members. Okay, this is my new number. The old number's dead. Don't use it anymore. And that's going to stop the flow of calls to him because he's getting calls all the time. He's getting calls from people who say they're with the FBI and he needs to pay a fine to have the investigated.
Yeah.
And so, he was addled, but smart enough to kind of listen to me, and I was able to help him out. A week later, the bad guys order a pizza to his house. Pizza delivery man gets to his house and says, hey, the guy who ordered the pizza from you wants to talk. Hands his cell phone to the old man, who gets on the phone. It's one of the bad guys. Hey, we've been trying to get a hold of you. We want to get you the money. I changed my phone number. What's your new number? And he gave up the new number, and we had to start from scratch. These bad
Those
guys,
motherfuckers.
these bad guys overseas will not stop when they get a good fish on the hook. And they went so far as to order a pizza to this guy's house and have the pizza delivery man hand his phone over so they can talk to him and try to recompromise him. And we had to start from scratch.
See, like that, I just don't understand. I understand the method behind some criminals, like a bank teller that steals cash from a bank and then can turn around and justify it by saying, it's okay, the bank screws people all the time. In 2008, they foreclosed on their house and all that. I understand the method behind that. I don't understand the method behind taking advantage of somebody so invasively.
Yeah.
The most vulnerable kind of person there is at the end of their, that's something that I just cannot
It's terrible.
fathom. I cannot understand how somebody who, it's like, do you not have a mother and father? Do you not have any empathy?
They're soulless. I agree.
So when I asked if people are sociopaths or just normal people, do you think that it's people that do those kind of crimes that are more on the psychopath, sociopath kind of?
Yeah, but I think there's also a means by which you can dehumanize your targets if they come from an entirely different culture. If you come from a poor nation like India or Nigeria, and I'm not picking on those nations, but these things tend to arise from there. You're able to take a look at these rich Americans, and maybe you're seething with anger, and you don't like them, and you have prejudices against them. And and you take a look at some of the things that maybe they have done historically to your nation, and that has impoverished your nation, and they're rationalizing their own behavior, because we talked about that earlier, how you rationalize it, and how maybe this is their way of getting some reparations.
Right. Got it. Okay. So it's the same kind of concept.
Exactly.
Wow. Well, everybody, please go follow Simon Investigations. Tom, thank you so much for being on. I really appreciate it. If you could leave one last positive message to our audience, what would that be?
Bad guys aren't as bad as you think. When someone gets out of prison and they're trying to rebuild their lives, give them a second chance.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Appreciate you coming on.